Hello family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with love caption stories. Remember to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comment section. And of course, generously hit that like button, it truly means the world to us. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's powerful tale. In the midst of betrayal and ambition, Amara Okafor found herself at the center of a boardroom showdown. Reginald, furious with her decisions, demanded answers. He blamed her for Victor's dismissal and the chaos that had ensued, but Amara remained composed, coolly stating that she was protecting the company from its own downfall. Her actions, she explained, were necessary to restore order, even if it meant making tough decisions. As Victor was escorted out, his screams echoed down the hallway, but Jude, watching from the back, couldn't hide his conflicted expression. He had always tried to protect his family, yet now his loyalty was being tested. In a quiet confrontation in the hallway, Jude questioned Amara's methods, but she firmly responded that she was doing what was necessary, no matter the cost. She had already made her choice, and that choice was her own. Meanwhile, Frances, always the schemer, played her own game, subtly trying to plant seeds of doubt in Jude's mind. But Jude, lost in his own confusion, could only mutter that he no longer knew what to believe. The family's divide was growing deeper. At the Wellington estate, Reginald held a private meeting with Amara, furious at her actions. He accused her of tearing apart everything he had built. But Amara stood firm, telling him that without her intervention, Apex would be owned by its rivals. She wasn't tearing things apart, she was saving them. Reginald, unwilling to let go of his control, threatened to make Jude choose between his family and her. The ultimatum cut through the air like a knife, and Jude, visibly shaken, couldn't understand why his father would go so far. Amara, however, was unflinching. She refused to bend to anyone's will, especially not to Reginald's. She had fought too hard to get where she was. In that moment, it became clear, her ambition wasn't just about the company, it was about securing her own place in a world that had never made space for her. The family confrontation left the room heavy with tension. As Amara packed her bags the following morning, she made a decision. She wasn't leaving out of defeat, she was leaving for her own peace. She had to step away from the mess her family had created. Jude tried to plead with her, but Amara, though she loved him, couldn't stay in the toxic environment any longer. She needed space to breathe, to think, and most importantly, to regain control over her own life. The weight of her decision hung in the air as she walked out of the door, leaving behind the family and company she had once tried so hard to fix. Titi, waiting for her outside, could see the resolve in Amara's eyes. She had chosen herself, and she wasn't looking back. Amara's decision to step away from her family and the company had been made, but the path ahead was far from easy. As she left the Wellington estate, the weight of the choices she had made pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that staying in the toxic environment would only crush her spirit. As she settled into her new life, away from the high-stakes world she had been part of, Amara found herself reflecting on the consequences of her actions. She thought about Victor, how his dismissal had been necessary but had left a mark on her conscience. The look of disbelief on his face when he was fired haunted her, but she couldn't afford to second guess her decisions. The family she had once tried to protect had turned into a battleground, and she had to choose herself before it was too late. In the midst of her internal turmoil, Titi was a constant presence, offering Amara a much-needed sense of stability. Titi, with her calm demeanor and unwavering loyalty, was the one person Amara could trust without question. As they sat together in Amara's new apartment, Titi tried to help her see the bigger picture. "You're not running away, Amara. You're building something for yourself," she said, her voice soothing yet firm. But Amara wasn't so sure. Every day, she questioned if she had made the right choice, if stepping away from everything she knew would be the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just the company or the family, it was her whole identity. But Titi reminded her of something crucial: it was okay to find a new path, to redefine who she was on her own terms. Meanwhile, back at Apex, Reginald's rage simmered. He couldn't believe Amara had abandoned him, his own flesh and blood. But it wasn't just about family loyalty, it was about power. Without her at his side, Reginald was vulnerable, and he would do whatever it took to get her back, even if it meant using extreme measures. His eyes were set on one thing, reclaiming his hold over her, over everything she had walked away from. However, he was too blinded by his own pride to understand that Amara had already moved on. Her resolve to carve out her own space in the world had only strengthened. As days passed, Amara slowly began to rebuild her life, taking small steps towards healing. She sought out new opportunities, looking for ways to make a real difference in the world without the weight of her family's expectations. It wasn't easy, every step was a challenge, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities without the shadow of Reginald's influence hanging over her. Then, one day, Jude appeared at her door. His face was a mixture of frustration and sorrow, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Amara, I need to understand," he said, his voice quiet yet desperate. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you come to me first?" Amara hesitated. She had wanted to tell him the truth, to make him understand, but the words were difficult to find. Instead, she simply looked at him and said, "Jude, I had to choose me. For the first time in my life, I had to choose my own future." He nodded, his gaze softening. "I understand," he whispered, though his heart still ached. "But I don't know if I can live with the choice you made." It was the beginning of an emotional reckoning for both of them. The love they shared was undeniable, but the cost of their choices was becoming clearer. With every passing day, Amara had made a new life for herself, but the ties to her past, to her family, and to Jude, were never truly severed. They were tangled, messy, and complicated. And though Amara had found the strength to step away, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was far from over. As the story continued, her resolve would be tested again and again, forcing her to confront the forces that still sought to control her. But Amara was no longer the same woman and she had been when she first walked away from the Wellington estate. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks, Amara's new life started to take shape. She found herself immersed in a project that she had always dreamed of, creating a non-profit aimed at empowering young women from underprivileged backgrounds. She used her knowledge and resources to help them develop skills and gain confidence, offering them the opportunities she herself had once been denied. The work was fulfilling in a way she hadn't expected. It was a new world, free of the constraints of her past, where she was in control, making decisions that aligned with her values. The sense of purpose she gained from it soothed the ache that had once weighed down her soul. But no matter how far she moved, the shadows of her past were never far behind. Reginald's attempts to lure her back into his fold intensified. He sent emissaries, made grand offers, even tried to manipulate Titi into persuading Amara to return. But Amara was resolute. She wasn't going back. She had learned the hard way that the price of staying in her family's world was too high. Still, the constant pressure from her father felt like a storm, one that threatened to undo everything she had worked for. Amara had become adept at brushing off the threats and the calls from family members who demanded she return. But it wasn't just the external pressures that plagued her. The internal struggle, the guilt, was much harder to fight. She wondered if she was abandoning her family in their hour of need, leaving them to their own destructive tendencies. Her mother, ever the silent participant in her father's plans, never reached out, never offered any kind of support. It was clear that their relationship had reached a breaking point. There were no more words of comfort or understanding from her side. It was Titi who remained by her side, offering her the kind of unwavering loyalty that Amara had come to cherish. Titi had been the one to help her find her voice, to remind her that her worth was not defined by her bloodline. But even Titi could see that Amara was starting to unravel. The toll of the emotional weight she carried, the guilt of her past choices, was catching up with her. Amara's dreams of building a better future seemed to collide with the reality of the family she had left behind. Meanwhile, Jude's heart remained in turmoil. He had struggled with the distance between them, but there was something else in his eyes when he came to see Amara, something deeper, something unspoken. He had spent days reflecting on his own role in her decision to leave. Had he failed her in some way? Had his love been conditional, bound by the expectations of her family, of their shared life? He couldn't quite answer those questions, but his feelings for Amara had not waned. They were tangled, confused, but powerful. Their reunion was inevitable. One afternoon, when the weight of their separation seemed unbearable, Jude arrived at her doorstep. Amara, sitting on the edge of her couch, looked up to find him standing there, the familiar sorrow in his eyes. Without a word, he crossed the room and took a seat beside her, his presence comforting in a way that only he could provide. "I've been thinking," Jude began, his voice low. "About everything. About why you left, and about why I stayed. I realize now that I've been living in the shadow of expectations, too, and that I've never really understood what it was like for you to carry the weight of that family's name." Amara listened intently, her heart heavy with the complexity of the moment. She had once believed that their love could transcend everything, but now, in the quiet of the room, she wasn't so sure. "I thought leaving would solve everything," she said softly. "But the truth is, it's harder than I ever imagined, and I don't know how to fix what's broken between us." Jude reached out and took her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes more than words ever could. "You don't have to fix anything, Amara. We just have to face it together. Whatever happens next, I want you to know I'll be here, no matter what." Amara closed her eyes, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill. She had always wanted to believe in fairy tale endings, but life wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, complicated, and sometimes, you had to break free of the chains that held you to move forward. As the days went by, the emotional turmoil that had plagued Amara slowly began to subside. She had found strength in her independence, in the work she was doing to make a difference in the world. But the pull of her past was always there, just under the surface. Would she be able to find peace? Or would the world she left behind, the family, the expectations, continue to haunt her? Reginald wasn't finished with her yet. His anger had only grown, and he wasn't one to be easily thwarted. The game was far from over, and Amara knew it. But this time, she was playing by her own rules. The days that followed Amara's reunion with Jude were filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The bond between them had always been strong, but now, it felt as if it were being tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. Despite the comfort his presence brought, Amara knew deep down that her journey was far from over. Her heart, still fragile from the scars of her past, struggled with the weight of the choices she had made and the consequences they had unleashed. Jude was her anchor, but he was also a reminder of everything she had left behind. As their relationship deepened, so did the realization that her world was still tethered to her family. The more she distanced herself from Reginald's influence, the more she realized just how much power he still held over her life. His attempts to manipulate her, using guilt and promises of loyalty, had escalated. Each message he sent was like a poison, slowly infiltrating the peace she had worked so hard to build. Despite the emotional toll, Amara pressed on with her mission. Her nonprofit was thriving, and she had begun to make real changes in the lives of the young women she mentored. They were her motivation, the reason she kept moving forward. But as her work grew, so did the demands on her time. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, moments when the weight of her past threatened to pull her back into a world she was desperately trying to escape. Titi, her constant ally, watched her struggle and stepped in whenever she could. Titi was the one person who understood the complexity of Amara's emotions, her loyalty to her family, the deep-rooted connection to the woman she used to be, and the need for independence that had torn her apart. "You don't have to do it all alone, Amara," Titi reminded her one afternoon as they sat in the office, discussing upcoming projects. "I know it's hard, but you're stronger than you think. Don't let them drag you back into their games." But Amara wasn't so sure. The further she distanced herself, the more Reginald seemed to push, finding new ways to threaten her, to test her resolve. His message this time was different. He wasn't asking for her return, he was demanding it. His words were sharp, filled with anger, and the implications were clear. Her defiance wouldn't be tolerated much longer. In the midst of this turmoil, Amara received a call that would change everything. It was from her mother, a voice she hadn't heard in months. The words that followed were laced with tension, but there was something else, something she hadn't expected, a plea for help. Her mother was afraid. Reginald, in his rage, had become more unpredictable, and now, even her mother was starting to feel the heat of his wrath. "Amara, you're the only one who can stop him," her mother's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Please, come back. I need you." The words struck Amara like a blow to the chest. She had long stopped waiting for her mother's support, but now, the reality of what was happening hit her hard. Reginald had reached a point of no return, and the people she cared about, her family, her mother, were caught in his storm. Titi saw the change in her friend the moment she hung up the phone. Amara's face had paled, her expression clouded with uncertainty. You don't have to go back, Amara. Not for him, not for anyone. But Amara knew that she couldn't ignore the call of her blood, the pull of family. The price of abandoning them now seemed too high, too dangerous. If she didn't act, her family, especially her mother, might pay the price for her defiance. Jude, too, saw the shift in Amara. He understood her desire to protect her loved ones, but he also feared the consequences of stepping back into that toxic world. I'll go with you, he offered one evening, his voice firm. We'll face whatever comes together. Amara shook her head, her heart heavy with the decision she was about to make. No, Jude, this is something I have to do on my own. If I don't face him now, there's no telling what he'll do next. With a deep breath, she made the decision. She would return to Reginald, but not as the woman he remembered. She would go back as the person she had become, stronger, more resolute, and ready to take control of her future. This was no longer about his rules. It was about her own. The day of her return arrived. The house, cold and imposing, stood before her like a fortress. Reginald's power still lingered in every corner, and as Amara walked through the gates, it felt like she was walking into the eye of a storm. Her mother was waiting for her, standing in the doorway, her face lined with worry. But there was also something else in her eyes, an understanding that Amara wasn't the same girl who had left. The moment their eyes met, the silence between them spoke volumes. I never wanted this for you, her mother whispered, her voice cracking. But I see now, you've become the person you needed to be. I don't want to lose you. Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her resolve firm. You won't lose me, but I can't keep playing his game. This ends now. As Amara prepared to confront Reginald, she knew this moment would define her future. The battle she was about to face wasn't just for her independence, it was for her soul. She had finally broken free of the chains that had once held her captive, and now, she was ready to face whatever storm Reginald would throw her way. But in the end, it wasn't just the fight for power that mattered. It was the fight for her identity, her strength, and the life she had worked so hard to build. Amara stood at the threshold of her childhood home, a place that had once been her prison, now offering nothing but memories of a past she desperately wanted to forget. Her mother's words echoed in her ears as she made her way inside, each step heavier than the last. The house was silent, too silent. No bustling servants, no sounds of her father barking orders. Just the cold stillness that always accompanied Reginald's presence when he wasn't around. Her heart beat faster as she made her way down the long, familiar corridor. The walls were lined with portraits, reminders of her family's legacy, a legacy she had once been proud of but now loathed. She was no longer the girl in those pictures, the girl who had once dreamed of a future in Reginald's world, the girl who had once feared disappointing him. Now, she feared nothing more than returning to that life. As she approached Reginald's study, the door opened before she could knock. Standing in the doorway was her father. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Amara, he said, his voice dripping with a mixture of contempt and mockery. I was wondering when you'd finally come to your senses. For a brief moment, Amara felt the familiar rush of anger rise in her chest. She wanted to lash out, to tell him how much he had destroyed her, how his actions had shattered everything she had once believed in. But she held her ground. She wasn't the same person she had been when she walked away. She had learned to control her emotions, to use her strength rather than allow it to be consumed by anger. I didn't come to my senses, Amara replied, her voice steady. I came to put an end to this, to everything. Reginald raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her change in demeanor. End it? Do you really think you can just walk in here and undo years of hard work, years of control? Amara stepped into the room, meeting his gaze head-on. You've never understood, have you? It's not about control, it's about power. And for once, I'm taking mine back. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Reginald looked at her as though he were studying a strange new version of his daughter. He didn't respond immediately, his mind working through the implications of her defiance. You think you can defeat me? He finally asked, his voice colder now. You're still my daughter. You'll always be part of this family, whether you like it or not. The power that flows through your veins, the legacy you were born into, it's not something you can escape, no matter how far you run. Amara clenched her fists, the weight of his words heavy on her heart. She had spent so much time trying to escape his influence, trying to sever the ties that bound her to him. But he was right about one thing: she was part of this family. She always would be, but that didn't mean she had to follow his rules. No, she said firmly. I am not part of your game anymore. I am not your pawn. And I will never let you control me again. Reginald's eyes darkened with fury. You think you can just walk away, Amara? You think you can change everything without consequences? I'm already living with the consequences, she replied, her voice rising. But I'm not afraid of them anymore. Her words hung in the air, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Reginald took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, but Amara stood tall. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her again. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. Amara, you still have so much to learn, Reginald said, his voice low and menacing. You think you've won? You think you can walk away from this and live a happy life? You're wrong. You'll always be tied to me. You'll always be part of this world. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. I'm done being a part of your world. I'm creating my own, and if you think you can destroy me, you're mistaken. In that moment, something shifted. Amara could feel the weight of her decision settling in. She was done living in the shadows of her family's control. She was ready to break free, to claim her future on her own terms. I've already taken back my power, she said quietly, and I'm not afraid to use it. Reginald's eyes flashed with anger, but he said nothing more. He had underestimated her for far too long, thinking he could always control her. Now, he was faced with the reality that Amara had outgrown him, that she was no longer the girl who feared his wrath. As she turned to leave, Amara knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She had faced the demons of her past and emerged stronger, more determined than ever. The battle wasn't over, but she had taken the first step toward reclaiming everything that was rightfully hers. Amara didn't look back as she walked out of her father's study, the door shutting behind her with a finality that echoed in her chest. She had done it. She had faced him, confronted the darkness of her past, and emerged victorious. But as she walked down the long hallway, the weight of her decision started to settle on her. She wasn't just walking away from Reginald. She was walking away from everything she had once known. And there was no going back. She stopped in front of the large window overlooking the estate, the sprawling grounds that had once been her playground, now feeling more like a prison. The beauty of the landscape, once a symbol of her family's wealth and power, now seemed hollow. She wasn't sure what her future held. But she knew one thing: it would be her own. No more puppets, no more strings. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie. She turned to see her mother, Evelyn, standing a few feet away, her expression unreadable. Evelyn had always been a woman of few words, but her silence was more powerful than any words could have been. Amara knew her mother had been a pawn in Reginald's games too, a woman who had sacrificed everything for the man she had loved, only to lose herself in the process. Amara, Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. I didn't expect you to come back. I didn't expect to either, Amara replied, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and determination. But I had to. I had to face him, face what I had become. Her mother stepped closer, her eyes searching Amara's face as if trying to understand the person standing before her. And what now? What do you plan to do? Amara took a deep breath, the answer coming to her more easily than she expected. I'm going to take control. I'm going to build something for myself. Something real. I'm done living in the shadows of this family's name. Evelyn's eyes softened, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for. But be careful, Amara. Reginald won't let you go so easily. I know, Amara replied, her voice hardening with resolve. But I'm not the same girl who was afraid of him. I'm not afraid anymore. Evelyn studied her daughter for a long moment before nodding slowly. You've always been your Father's daughter, in more ways than one. But you've got your own fire. Don't let it burn you out. Amara turned away, her heart heavy with the weight of her mother's words. Evelyn had never been able to stand up to Reginald, never found the strength to break free from his control. Amara wasn't sure if she could either, but she was willing to try. For herself. As she made her way out of the house and toward her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from her lawyer, confirming that the paperwork to reclaim her assets was underway. The world she had once been part of, the world that had defined her, was slipping away piece by piece. And with each passing moment, the future she was building for herself became clearer. But there was something else, a gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. Reginald wouldn't give up easily. He would find a way to manipulate, to control, to make her pay for defying him. But she was ready for it. She had already made her decision. She would not be his victim anymore. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Damon. She had been in contact with him only sporadically since leaving the mansion, but something about his presence in her life had felt right. He was a constant, someone who understood her in a way no one else did. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon, but his message was simple, yet heavy with meaning. I know what you're doing, Amara. You're stronger than you think. Let me help. She stared at the words, her mind racing. She knew she had to be careful. Damon had always been supportive, but his loyalty to her family ran deep, and she couldn't afford to let that cloud her judgment. Still, a part of her wanted to reach out, to lean on him, to take comfort in the one person who had always been there for her. But another part of her warned her that leaning on him could be just as dangerous as leaning on anyone else from her past. She had to do this on her own. She had to prove that she could stand without anyone's help. The decision was harder than she had anticipated, but in that moment, she made up her mind. She wouldn't reply to Damon, not yet, at least. She needed to focus on her own strength, her own journey. The engine of her car roared to life as she pulled out of the driveway, the mansion fading into the distance behind her. The road ahead was uncertain, but Amara was determined to walk it alone. There would be battles to fight, enemies to outwit, but she was ready. She had chosen her own path. And no one, not even Reginald, could take that from her. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into her new office, the clean, minimalist space, a far cry from the opulent surroundings of the mansion she had just left behind. The walls were painted in cool shades of gray, the floors polished wood, and the desk in the center of the room was sleek and modern. It was everything she had imagined when she first dreamed of escaping her father's control, a place where she could finally build something of her own, free from the shadows of her past. She placed her bag down on the desk and walked over to the large windows that overlooked the bustling city below. The skyline stretched out before her, a sea of glass and steel that seemed to pulse with energy. This was the world she was choosing to enter, a world where power wasn't inherited, it was earned. But even as she stared out at the horizon, her mind couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She had always been hyper-aware of the eyes on her, the pressure of a legacy that wasn't entirely her own. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her lawyer, confirming that the initial steps toward her financial independence were in place. The words were a reminder that she was no longer bound by her father's influence. And yet, there was something unsettling about it. The reality of the situation was sinking in. She had been so determined to break free, but now that she had, the weight of responsibility was heavier than she had expected. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her assistant knocking gently on the door before entering. A young woman in her late 20s, she was efficient, professional, and had been with Amara since her first day in the office. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder that Amara wasn't truly alone in this. Ms. Knight, the first batch of investors will be here in 30 minutes, the assistant said, handing Amara a neatly organized folder. I've scheduled the meeting in the conference room. Amara nodded, glancing at the contents of the folder. This was it, the moment when her dreams would either begin to take shape or crumble under the weight of doubt. The investors she was meeting with were the first step toward building her empire. They didn't know her father's name, and she intended to keep it that way. She wasn't Amara Knight, the daughter of a powerful businessman. She was Amara Knight, an entrepreneur, a woman who was going to prove that she could succeed on her own terms. Thank you, Amara said, giving her assistant a nod. Let's make this count. As she walked toward the conference room, her thoughts drifted back to her family. To her mother, who had stayed silent for so long, and to Damon, who had offered his support without hesitation. But most of all, her mind returned to Reginald. She could feel the weight of his gaze, even from a distance. He had always thought of her as a pawn, a tool to be manipulated for his own gain. But, now, it was her turn to play the game. She entered the conference room, where the investors were already seated, their eyes trained on her. Amara could feel the nerves threatening to rise within her, but she squashed them. She was in control now. She was the one they had come to see. Good morning, gentlemen, she said, her voice steady and confident as she took her seat at the head of the table. I'm Amara Knight, and I'm here to show you why investing in my company will be the best decision you ever make. The meeting went better than she had expected. The investors were impressed by her vision, her knowledge, and her ability to hold her ground. They didn't see the scared girl who had once been at the mercy of her father's whims. They saw a woman with fire in her eyes, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to fight for it. By the time the meeting ended, Amara could already feel the shift. The tide was turning. She was no longer just the daughter of Reginald Knight. She was a force in her own right. As the investors left, her assistant approached her with a smile. They're interested. They want to move forward. Amara couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was the first step. She had taken the reins, and now, she was steering her own destiny. But as the excitement of the moment settled, the reality of her situation crept in again. Reginald wouldn't let this go without a fight. He had too much to lose. And Amara knew that he wouldn't stop until he had her under his control once again. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not yet. Her phone buzzed once more, and this time, it was a message from Damon. She hesitated before opening it, knowing the temptation to respond was strong. But she couldn't afford to be distracted by anything, or anyone, that might pull her off course. You're doing great, Amara. I'm proud of you. But remember, I'm here if you need me. Always. The words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to reach out, to let him in, to share the triumphs and the doubts. But she couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, and she didn't want anyone to have a stake in her success, especially not someone who still had ties to her father. With a deep breath, Amara set the phone aside. She was on her own now. And the game was just beginning. Amara sat alone in her office late into the night, the only light coming from the soft glow of her desk lamp and the neon lights of the city outside her window. The excitement of the day had long since faded, replaced by a quiet stillness that seemed to say TTLE into her bones. Despite the success of her first meeting with the investors, something gnawed at her, a feeling of impending danger she couldn't shake. Her father had always been a master of manipulation, and Amara knew he wouldn't let her escape his grasp so easily. She turned the chair slightly, gazing out at the city as if it might offer her some clarity. The world outside seemed indifferent, each building, each light, simply existing, while inside, her mind raced. The clock ticked relentlessly, and with every passing second, she felt the pressure mounting. She had taken the first step toward her independence, but there was still so much left to prove, and so many threats to face. The soft buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts, and she picked it up instinctively. It was a message from Damon. You've got this, Amara. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'm with you, always. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, but she pushed it away. She couldn't afford to be distracted. Damon's words, as comforting as they were, reminded her of what she had to protect. Not just her business, but her heart. There was so much she hadn't told him, so much she couldn't. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from her lawyer, who had been handling the legal side of her business ventures. Amara, we've run into a bit of a complication. The lawyer's voice was tense. Reginald Knight is fighting back harder than we expected. There's a clause in your family's trust that ties your father's holdings to your assets. It's complicated, and I'm afraid it could jeopardize your independence if he chooses to exercise his rights. Amara's heart sank, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her father had always been a step ahead. And this was his retaliation. He had been patient, waiting for her to make her move, and now, it seemed, he was prepared to pull the strings to drag her back into his world. What do we need to do to protect my interests? She asked, her voice steady. There's a loophole, the lawyer replied. But it will take time, and we'll need to keep this under wraps for now. If your father finds out we're challenging him legally, it could escalate the situation. Amara nodded, already thinking several steps ahead. The last thing she needed was to be caught in a battle that would tarnish her public image or distract her from her business. But she wasn't about to back down. Not now. I'll trust you to handle it, she said, hanging up the phone with a sigh. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. The stakes were higher than she had anticipated, and her father was more dangerous than she had ever realized. She had thought that cutting ties with him would free her, but instead, it felt like she was stepping into a larger, more complex game, one that she wasn't sure she was prepared to win. As she sat in the silence, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her assistant knocking softly. Before entering, Ms. Knight, there's someone here to see you, the assistant said, her voice hesitant. It's Amara's breath caught in her throat as the assistant trailed off, and she looked up to see a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Reginald. His presence seemed to fill the room, his tall frame casting a shadow over everything. He was dressed in his usual impeccable suit, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension thick in the air. You've been busy, Reginald said finally, his voice smooth, almost mocking. Amara stood up, forcing herself to remain composed, though her heart was racing. She hadn't expected him to show up in person, not so soon, not after everything. What do you want, father? She asked, her tone cold. Reginald stepped forward, his eyes scanning her office with a look of disapproval. I came to remind you of something, he said, his voice low. You may think you've freed yourself from my influence, but you're still my daughter. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you fight, you'll never be able to erase the ties that bind us. Amara clenched her fists at her sides, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She had to remain calm, she had to keep control. This was just another power play, another attempt to put her back in her place. I'm not interested in your threats, she said, her voice steady. I'm building something on my own now, and you can't take that away from me. Reginald's lips curled into a small smile. We'll see about that. You may be in charge of your little business, Amara, but you'll never be free of me. Never. He turned on his heel, walking toward the door, his back straight and his steps purposeful. Before he left, he paused, looking over his shoulder. I'll be watching, he said, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable warning. Always. And with that, he was gone. Amara stood there, frozen for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her like a cold fog. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. He would fight her every step of the way, trying to undermine her, to control her. But something inside her hardened. She had been through worse than this. She had survived his manipulation before, and she would survive it again. This time, she wasn't going to play by his rules. This time, she would win. The days that followed Reginald's visit were filled with tension and uncertainty. Amara was no longer just battling for her place in the business world, she was waging a war for her freedom. Every decision she made was weighed down by the knowledge that her father would stop at nothing to pull her back into his grasp. The legal loophole her lawyer had found offered hope, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing inside her. Despite the pressure, Amara kept up appearances. She continued to meet with investors, finalize deals, and make strides toward expanding her company. But behind the polished exterior, she was constantly on edge, watching for any sign that her father was making his move. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now, not when everything she had worked for was at risk. One afternoon, as Amara sat in her office, reviewing contracts and making calls, her assistant entered with a message. Ms. Knight, there's someone here to see you, the assistant said, her voice hesitant. It's Mr. Damon Blackwell. He insists it's urgent. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Damon. She hadn't heard from him in days, and though she had tried to stay focused on the business, his absence had left a noticeable hole. She stood up quickly, smoothing her suit as she nodded for her assistant to show him in. Damon entered with his usual confident stride, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on Amara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken tension between them, an awareness of the complexities in their relationship. Amara, Damon said softly, his voice carrying a mix of concern and something deeper that she couldn't quite place. We need to talk. She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. What's going on? She asked, her tone guarded but welcoming. Damon sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. It's your father. He's been making moves behind the scenes, and I've gotten wind of something serious. He paused, as if measuring his words. You need to be careful. He's already started to pull strings with some of your investors. Amara's heart sank. I knew it, she murmured, her mind racing. I knew he wouldn't just let me go. What's he doing? He's trying to sabotage you, Damon said bluntly. He's planting doubt among your potential partners, casting shadows on your credibility. He's even making calls to people you've worked with in the past, trying to turn them against you. Amara's fists clenched under the desk. I won't let him win. Not again. Damon leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. You need to be ready for this, Amara. Your father plays a long game, and he's good at it. He'll manipulate the situation to his advantage unless you act quickly. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. For so long, she had thought she could outsmart her father, play the game just as he had taught her, but this was different. This wasn't just business, this was her life. I can handle it, she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. I've been dealing with him for years. This isn't anything new. Damon's expression softened slightly, but there was still a flicker of worry in his eyes. Amara, you can't do this alone. I'm here for you, but you have to trust me. You need to take more aggressive action before he moves again. Her mind whirred as she processed everything Damon had said. Her father was dangerous, but she had faced danger before. She had learned to be strategic, to outmaneuver her opponents. But now, it felt like the stakes were higher than they had ever been. I'll make sure to take the necessary steps, she replied, her voice steady. But you need to promise me something, Damon. If this gets worse, if it threatens everything we've built, I won't hesitate to do what's necessary to protect myself. Damon met her gaze, his lips pressing into a thin line. I know, but you don't have to do this alone. You're not alone, Amara. For a brief moment, Amara allowed herself to soften. Damon's words, his unwavering support, were a lifeline in the chaos. But she couldn't afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment. She had a company to run, a battle to fight, and no time for distractions. I need to get back to work, she said, standing up and pushing aside any lingering thoughts of vulnerability. But I'll keep you updated. And thank you for everything. Damon stood as well, his eyes lingering on her for a beat longer than necessary. You know where to find me, Amara. And don't forget, I'm not going anywhere. As he left the room, Amara felt the weight of his words settling over her like a comfort she didn't deserve but desperately needed. She wasn't alone in this fight, not anymore. But the battle was far from over, and she knew that her father would stop at nothing to tear her down. With renewed determination, Amara returned to her desk, her mind already racing with the next steps she needed to take. This wasn't just about protecting her business anymore, it was about protecting herself, her future, her independence, and everything she had worked so hard to build. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The days that followed Damon's warning felt like a whirlwind of decisions and actions. Amara knew that every move she made had to be calculated, deliberate. Her father was a master of manipulation, and his tactics were always designed to catch her off guard. But this time, she was prepared. At least, she hoped she was. With the pressure mounting from all sides, Amara immersed herself in work. She attended board meetings with renewed focus, making sure every detail was covered. Her team was loyal, but she could sense the undercurrent of unease. Her reputation had been called into question, and rumors had started to swirl, some even within her own company. But she refused to let it shake her resolve. She had been through worse, and she would get through this, too. One morning, as Amara walked into her office, her assistant handed her a letter. It was from her father's lawyer. I think you should see this immediately, Ms. Knight, the assistant said, her tone tight with concern. Amara ripped open the envelope and skimmed the letter. It was a formal demand for her to return the control of her company to her father's holdings. The lawyer claimed that Amara's acquisition of the company had been made under fraudulent pretenses and that she had no legal right to retain ownership. The anger that surged through Amara's veins was like a firestorm. How dare her father try to take Everything from her again. He had failed to break her spirit in the past, and he would fail now. But the lawyer's letter wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. If she didn't comply, he would take legal action. She crumpled the letter in her hand and tossed it into the trash. I won't be bullied, she muttered to herself. She couldn't afford to back down now. Amara's first instinct was to call her lawyer, but something inside her told her that she needed to do more than just defend herself. She needed to go on the offensive. She needed to take control of the narrative before her father could manipulate it any further. She spent the next few hours in her office, making calls and preparing a statement. It was time for her to publicly address the accusations and take a stand, not just for herself, but for her employees and the company she had built from the ground up. At the same time, she knew she had to find a way to neutralize the threat from within her own company. She trusted her team, but there were whispers. Whispers that couldn't be ignored. Amara had always believed in loyalty, but she was starting to question how much of it existed around her. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. It was Damon. I've got something for you, his message read. Meet me at the usual spot in an hour. Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat and left her office, her mind racing with possibilities. She had no idea what Damon had uncovered, but if it was anything that could help her fight her father's legal battle, she was ready to hear it. When she arrived at the small cafe they frequented, Damon was already seated, waiting for her. His eyes flickered to her as she approached, his expression unreadable. I've been looking into your father's dealings, Damon said, leaning forward slightly. There's more to his plans than just getting the company back. He's been trying to control the board members, some of them are working with him, trying to push you out without you even knowing. Amara's blood ran cold. She had known there were whispers, but this was far worse than she'd imagined. Who? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. Damon hesitated, then slid a small folder across the table to her. These are the names of found so far. I've also tracked their communication with your father's lawyer. He's not just trying to take the company from you, he's planting people within your OWN ranks to make sure he wins. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She opened the folder and scanned the names and documents. It was all there, proof of the conspiracy, of the treachery that had been unfolding right under her nose. Is there any way to stop them? She asked, her voice sharp. There's a way, Damon said, his eyes gleaming with a mix of determination and something darker. But it won't be easy. You'll have to move quickly. You need to neutralize these threats and rally your loyal allies before it's too late. Amara's mind raced. She had always prided herself on being strategic, on outthinking her opponents. But this was different. Her father wasn't just an opponent, he was a force, a shadow looming over every decision she made. The stakes had never been higher. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice unwavering. I'm not going to let him win. Not now, not ever. Damon nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I'm with you, Amara. We'll get through this together. As Amara stood to leave, a sense of clarity settled over her. She wasn't just fighting for her company anymore, she was fighting for herself, for her future, for the legacy she had built. And she would do whatever it took to protect it. The game was on, and she wasn't going to let her father win this time. The following days were a blur of strategy and swift moves. Amara spent long hours in her office, poring over documents, phone records, and everything Damon had gathered. Every piece of the puzzle was crucial, and she couldn't afford to miss a single detail. Her father's network of influence was deep, but she was starting to see cracks in the armor. She had to act fast. Every decision, every step, had to be calculated with precision. The board meeting was scheduled in just a few days, and it was her chance to finally confront the betrayals that had been brewing within her company. She had a plan, one that would put her in the driver's seat. For good, but only if she could execute it flawlessly. Amara sat at her desk, staring at the names Damon had given her. These were the people who had sold their loyalty to her father, the ones who were undermining her at every turn. Some of them were board members, others were high-level executives. They had been working in the shadows, pushing her out of the picture, without ever letting her see it coming. But Amara had always prided herself on her ability to outmaneuver her adversaries. She wasn't going to let these traitors take everything she had worked for. She picked up her phone and dialed Damon's number. When he answered, she didn't waste time. With pleasantries. I need a meeting with the board members who are still loyal to me. Now, she said, her voice sharp. Damon paused for a moment, then replied. Consider it done. I'll get everything set up. We'll meet tonight. Amara hung up, feeling a surge of adrenaline. The time for waiting was over. The board meeting was going to be her battleground, and she was ready to fight. That night, she arrived at the hidden location Damon had arranged, a private room in a high-end hotel, far from the prying eyes of her father's allies. Around the table sat the few members of the board she could still trust, each one looking to her for guidance. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Amara began, standing at the head of the table. We don't have much time. My father is trying to take control of the company again, and he's planted people within our ranks to make sure it happens. But we can stop him. We have to act now. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting each of their gazes. She could see the fear in their eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. These were the people who had stood by her, who believed in her vision. Even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against them. We have everything we need to expose his plans, Amara continued. I've got proof of the conspiracy, and I'm going to take it to the media, to the press. We'll show the world what he's been doing behind the scenes. But we need to make our move first. We can't afford to wait any longer. One of the board members, a man in his mid-40s named Ethan, spoke up. Amara, are you sure? This is the right time. We're risking everything. If we go public with this, there's no turning back. I've already risked everything, Amara replied, her voice unwavering. I've lost too much already to back down now. If we don't act, we'll lose the company, and I'll lose everything. My father will take everything from us, and there won't be anything left to fight for. The room fell silent for a moment. Amara could feel the weight of their decision hanging in the air. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was personal. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and making sure her father would never control her again. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan nodded. You're right, we'll back you up, Amara. Let's do this. Amara's heart surged with a mixture of relief and determination. She had the support she needed. And now it was time to take action. The next day, Amara called an emergency board meeting. The moment the members arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. She had already sent out a message to her father's lawyer, demanding he come to the meeting. Her father had to know that she wasn't backing down. The meeting started, and Amara wasted no time. She stood up and addressed the board. My father has been trying to manipulate this company from the inside, planting spies and traitors among us. He's trying to take everything from me, from us. But today, that changes. I'm taking back control. Amara revealed the evidence Damon had uncovered, proof of her father's underhanded tactics, his attempts to force his way back into the company. The faces around the table were a mixture of shock and disbelief, but they knew what it meant. The war had just begun, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Her father's lawyer sat stone-faced as she presented the information, but Amara could see the cracks forming in his armor. He knew he couldn't deny the evidence. The truth was out. You have no right to do this, Amara, her father's lawyer finally said, his voice shaking. This will end in court, mark my words. We'll see, Amara replied coolly. But it's not just about the law anymore. It's about who controls the future of this company, and I intend to control it. With that, the board members exchanged glances, silently agreeing to back Amara. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Amara left the meeting room, feeling a rush of adrenaline. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the winning side. But she knew her father wouldn't give up easily. He would fight to the bitter end, and she had to be ready. The next steps were clear. She would take the evidence to the press, expose the lies, and take back what was rightfully hers. But she also knew that her father wouldn't go down without a fight. And Amara was ready to make the final move. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Amara worked relentlessly, coordinating with Damon and the loyal board members to finalize their plan. Every detail had to be perfect. She knew her father's response wouldn't be a quiet one. He would retaliate with everything he had, and she had to be prepared for the storm. Amara was determined, though. The evidence was irrefutable, and the press was waiting for her to make her move. She'd already arranged an interview with a high-profile reporter, someone known for uncovering corporate corruption. This would be the catalyst, the moment everything would change. But as the interview date drew closer, a growing unease settled in Amara's stomach. She had no illusions about what was at stake. Exposing her father's crimes would rock the company to its core, and there was no telling what kind of damage control he would try to put in place. He was ruthless, and he had always believed he was untouchable. It was time to shatter that illusion. On the night before the interview, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the city below. The lights seemed distant, almost like a dream, and she felt a strange sense of calm. This was the final step. Once the truth was out, there would be no going back. A knock at her door broke her thoughts. She turned to see Damon standing in the doorway, a concerned look on his face. "You okay?" he asked, stepping into the room. Amara forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, just thinking about everything that's coming." Damon sat down next to her, his expression serious. "I know it's a lot, but we've got this. You've been working toward this moment your whole life." "I know," she replied softly, her gaze returning to the city skyline. "But it's not just about the company, it's about my father. This whole time, I've been fighting against him, but now it's real. I'm not just trying to protect myself, I'm going after him. For everything he's done." Damon nodded. "I get it. He's not just a business rival to you. He's your father." Amara turned to him, her eyes intense. "And I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I'm worthy of everything he's taken from me. This is my chance to show him that I'm more than just his daughter. I'm a force to be reckoned with." Damon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you're going to take everything back. Tomorrow, the world will see you for who you truly are." Amara took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination fill her. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore, she was doing it for the people who believed in her, for the ones who had stood by her when everything seemed impossible. The next day, Amara stood in front of the cameras, her heart pounding in her chest. The interview was set to air live, and the world was about to watch as she exposed her father's betrayal. She had rehearsed her words, practiced her tone, but nothing could have prepared her for the gravity of the moment. The reporter, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, greeted Amara with a firm handshake. "Amara, thank you for agreeing to this interview. You've been through a lot in recent months, and now you're prepared to take your father to court. What led to this moment?" Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My father has been running this company for years. But it's never been his company, it's always been mine. From the moment I joined the business, he's worked to control me, to manipulate my decisions. But I'm done being controlled. I've uncovered the truth. I've seen the extent of his betrayal. And now, the world will see it too." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about corporate sabotage, betrayal, and attempts to take control of the company away from you. But what evidence do you have to back up your claims?" Amara nodded, her expression steely. "I have all the evidence I need. Damon, my business associate, has done the research. We've tracked every illegal move, every shady deal my father made. And I'm prepared to share it with the world. No more hiding in the shadows." With that, Amara motioned to her assistant, who slid a file across the table. The reporter took the file, flipping through the pages. Her eyes widened as she saw the documents, proof of bribes, forged contracts, and secret meetings with rival companies. It was all there, in black and white. "This is explosive," the reporter said, her voice tight with surprise. "But what do you think will happen next? Your father has a lot of power in this industry. Will you be able to take him down?" Amara's eyes hardened. "I've already taken the first step. Now, I'm going to see this through. My father will face the consequences of his actions, and I will take back what's mine. No one is going to stand in my way." The interview continued for another hour, as Amara laid bare every detail of her father's underhanded tactics. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. As Amara watched the interview replay on the news that evening, she felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. The storm had begun. Her father would retaliate, but she was ready. She had the evidence, the support, and the resolve to see this through to the end. Now, all she had to do was wait for the fallout. And Amara was prepared for whatever came next. The aftermath of the interview was immediate and explosive. The media was in a frenzy, reporting on the scandal that was shaking the corporate world to its core. News outlets were dissecting every detail of the evidence Amara had provided, and the public was in shock. Her father, once revered as a titan of the industry, was now facing the very real possibility of legal action and public disgrace. Amara sat at her desk, staring at the computer screen, her thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and next moves. She had expected this reaction, of course, the world would react. But she had no idea just how swiftly things would escalate. Her phone rang incessantly, the calls from reporters, colleagues, and former associates blending together in a chaotic buzz. Her assistant, Maya, knocked and entered without waiting for a response. "Amara, your father just released a statement," she said, placing a piece of paper on Amara's desk. Amara scanned the letter. It was filled with accusations, claims of media distortion, and veiled threats of legal retribution. But the most startling part was his declaration that Amara had been manipulated by Damon, that she wasn't in control of her own decisions. Amara's blood boiled. Her father had a well-practiced skill at twisting the narrative, and this was no different. He was trying to undermine her by portraying her as weak, as someone who couldn't make decisions without the influence of others. "This is pathetic," Amara muttered under her breath, crumpling the paper and tossing it into the trash bin. Maya watched her closely. "Do you want me to draft a response?" "No." Amara shook her head. "We're not responding to his lies. We let the evidence speak for itself." Amara's phone rang again, and this time, it was Damon. She quickly answered. "Amara," Damon's voice was tense, "you saw the statement. He's already preparing to fight back in the courts. We need to be ready." "I know," Amara said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her. "But we're not backing down. We've got the truth on our side, and now, the public knows it. It's only a matter of time before he faces the consequences." Damon paused. "Just be careful. I know your father's next move. He'll come at you in every way possible, emotionally, legally, even personally." Amara didn't flinch. "I'm prepared. We're not just going to win this fight, we're going to end it once and for all." The next few days were a blur of meetings, legal consultations, and strategizing. Amara and Damon spent hours reviewing the evidence, preparing for the inevitable legal battles that would follow. Her father wasn't going to let this go easily, and he would use every tactic at his disposal to discredit her, to tear her down. But Amara wasn't worried. She had made her move, and the world was already watching. There was no way he could control the narrative now. She had the support of the media, the evidence, and, most importantly, the unwavering drive to see this through. It was during one of these late-night strategy sessions that Damon looked at Amara with a heavy expression. "We need to talk about your next steps," he said, voice low. Amara glanced up from the pile of documents in front of her. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about your future. After this, after you expose him, there's no going back. You're going to be the face of this company, but you need to be prepared for everything to change." Amara's heart raced. She had thought about it, but hearing Damon say it made it feel real. Her life, her legacy, her entire identity, would shift once the battle was over. "I'm ready for it," she said firmly, meeting Damon's gaze. "I've spent my whole life waiting for this. It's time to take control of my future." Damon nodded. "Just remember, what you're doing isn't just about this company. It's about your legacy. You're going to inspire people, and you need to be prepared for the responsibility that comes with that." Amara took a deep breath, absorbing his words. She wasn't just fighting her father anymore, she was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for her own identity, for the future she had always dreamed of but never dared to reach for. The following week, Amara was back in the spotlight, but this time, it was in the courtroom. Her father had filed a lawsuit, accusing her of defamation, claiming that the evidence she had provided was fabricated, and he was doing everything in his power to discredit her. The trial was a media spectacle, drawing attention from all corners of the business world. Amara's father, as expected, had enlisted his team of top lawyers, while Amara had Damon by her side, guiding her every step of the way. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as both sides presented their arguments, but Amara never wavered. She was resolute. As the trial dragged on, Amara continued to stay focused on the bigger picture. Her father's empire was crumbling, and he was no longer the untouchable man he once was. She had done what she set out to do. Now, it was only a matter of time before the world saw him for what he truly was. One evening, as the trial continued to unfold, Amara received a call from her lawyer. "We've won the case," the lawyer said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The evidence is irrefutable, and the judge has ruled in your favor. Your father will have to step down from the company." Amara sat back in her chair, her heart racing. For a moment, it didn't seem real. It was over. The fight, the struggle, the years of torment, it was all behind her now. Her father had lost. The news hit the media like a storm. Headlines flashed across every screen: "Amara takes control. Father forced to step down after legal defeat." It was a moment of triumph, but it also felt strangely empty. Amara had won the battle, but the war had taken a toll on her in ways she hadn't fully processed yet. Sitting in her office late that night, she stared out the window, her mind racing. The city lights twinkled below, but they felt distant, as if she were no longer part of the world she had once known. She had achieved everything she set out to do, but the cost had been high. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Damon. "Celebrating tonight. You should be." Amara couldn't help but smile at the simplicity of his message. She typed a quick reply: "Not yet. Still processing." Within minutes, Damon appeared in her office, a bottle of champagne in hand. He set it down on the table, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "You did it, Amara," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "You took control of your destiny." Amara nodded, but the words didn't feel as satisfying as they should. "It's just the weight of everything. My father's out. I'm in charge. But what now?" Damon regarded her with a knowing look. "Now, you build. You reshape everything." "Everything," she echoed. "Yes. Your company, your life, everything. This is just the beginning. You've proven your strength, but now, you need to lead with vision, with purpose. The world is watching." Amara leaned back in her chair, letting his words sink in. She had always been good at the corporate game, strategizing, making moves, taking risks. But this was different. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was the one making the rules now. "I never wanted to do this," Amara said quietly, her voice filled with a raw honesty she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. "I never wanted to tear down my father. But it was the only way." "I know," Damon replied. "And you did it for the right reasons. You did it for yourself, and for the future." A silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of the moment. Amara's mind wandered to her childhood, those years spent living in the shadow of her father's expectations, the constant push for perfection. For so long, she had done everything for him, for the company, never questioning whether she had her own desires or dreams. But now, that was all changing. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Damon's gaze softened. "I know you are. But fear is natural. You've been through a storm, and now, it's time to rebuild, piece by piece. You're not alone in this." Amara met his eyes, a fierce determination rising within her. "No, I'm not alone anymore." The next few weeks were a blur of board meetings, new leadership initiatives, and corporate restructuring. The media coverage was relentless, with commentators praising Amara for her courage and vision, while others questioned her ability to lead after such a dramatic upheaval. But she wasn't concerned with what the pundits said. She had her eyes set on something much more important: restoring the integrity of the company and making it her own. As her leadership began to take shape, Amara found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of reshaping the corporate world, not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced, marginalized, or overlooked. She started implementing policies that focused on transparency, inclusion, and fair opportunities for all employees, especially women and minorities. Her vision for the future of the company wasn't just about profit, it was about creating a legacy that would inspire others. But as she dove deeper into her work, the pressures of leadership began to weigh heavily on her. The higher she rose, the lonelier it became. The people she once considered allies now viewed her with suspicion, and those who had supported her during the legal battle now had their own agendas. One evening, as Amara sat alone in her office, reviewing the latest reports, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her mother. "I'm proud of you, Amara. But don't forget what matters most. Don't lose yourself in all of this." Her mother's words struck a chord deep within her. She had spent so many years focused on proving herself, first to her father, and now to the world, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. What had it all been for if she couldn't find peace and fulfillment within herself? Amara set the phone down, her mind whirling. She had achieved what she once thought was impossible, but the victory felt hollow. She needed balance, needed to remember who she was beneath the layers of ambition and duty. With a deep breath, Amara stood up from her desk, resolving to find that balance, no matter what it took. She couldn't let the corporate world consume her soul. She had fought too hard to let that happen. The following day, as Amara was preparing for another series of meetings, Damon walked into her office, holding a coffee cup in each hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Amara looked up, offering a small smile. "I'm surviving, but I think I'm learning something important." Damon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "I can't do it all," she admitted. "I can't carry the weight of the world on my shoulders and expect to stay grounded." Damon set the coffee cups down in front of her, his eyes softening. "You don't have to do it all alone, Amara. That's the beauty of what you've created. You have a team, you have people who believe in you, and you have me." Her heart skipped a beat, but she pushed aside the flutter of emotions. "I know, and I won't forget it." As they sat together, sipping coffee, Amara realized that the true challenge wasn't just conquering the business world, it was finding the strength to remain true to herself while leading it. And with Damon by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. I'm glad you made it to the end. What a journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating tales from Love Caption Stories. We'd love to hear from you. What lessons did this story leave you with? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay inspired and stay strong.